It's my pleasure to introduce Shannon Warren, who's a very experienced leader. Shannon's been in leadership roles for more than 20 years and is currently the principal of Woodcroft College. Shannon also gives back to our educational landscape in a variety of other roles, particularly around board representation, where she's served on the SACE board. And is currently the board chair of the South Australian Association of Independent Schools. It's our pleasure today to talk to Shannon Warren on Voices of Change.
Journey in education has really taken me across the globe. So from Sydney to London, to Brunei, to Adelaide, to New Zealand, and now back in South Australia. And I think through those experiences, I've worked in a range of roles, curriculum roles. I've also worked in pastoral care roles. And I'm really glad that I've had that very broad range of experiences and an international perspective. And I've really been so lucky to be supported by some amazing mentors in those various contexts as well. So a very deep career in single-sex education, but now I'm back working in co-education. I've worked in boarding schools, I've worked in regional schools, international schools, and I really feel all of those things have helped shape the leader that I am. And most importantly, I think taking these diverse opportunities has been instrumental in giving me a broader perspective on education, cultural context, working with other leaders. I always say to people, how do you learn to be a principal? And that's actually by watching the way other people do the job. So I've been building my kit bag of experiences across those various contexts as well. And I always say that too, if you don't go, you don't grow. And I would certainly say, there are very few leaders who have risen up through the ranks in the one context. And I'm grateful that I can bring those various experiences to my current role and also to previous roles. I think what's really drawn me to education, I think is, it's obvious, but education really allows us to contribute to something larger than ourselves, something that builds enduring greatness through that blend of personal humility, but also through a professional will. And I think certainly one of the things that I've found most valuable in my leadership journey is the deliberate career moves that I've made, but also not underestimating those sideways moves that I've made. That it's really, I think, made me a much more well-rounded and adaptable leader. And each context has really challenged me to grow in different ways. I'm really glad I'm in a profession that allows me to impact on people's lives every single day. And the satisfaction of knowing that you're making a difference far outweighs any challenges that you face along the way, and it really gives you that strength to keep going. And as I mentioned, having experienced education across multiple countries, I've gained insights that continue to inform my approach to leadership and also to change management.
Shannon, thank you very much. And I'm a big believer in bringing those cultural understandings and learnings to different contexts. You mentioned earlier that you've been lucky to have mentors in your career and your involvement in education. What advice can you give to aspiring leaders in coming up through the ranks?
Well, again, I think they call the comfort zone for a reason, and that's because it's comfortable. So I think really stepping out of your comfort zone, and that's, I always say, even to my students now, the things in my life I'm most proud of are the things that have challenged me the most. So I think sometimes aspirant leaders can perhaps look at a job description, and if they can't tick every single box, particularly female leaders, they'll often not put themselves forward. And again, I think there's things I'm still learning now that are not in my job description, for example, and you just have to build that experience and that confidence to say, I can lean in on other experiences that I've had in order to be able to manage this particular situation. I think another thing I always say is creating opportunities where maybe they don't obviously exist. And something else I often say to people I'm a professional companion for or a mentor to is, if opportunity doesn't knock, build your own door. I don't think you should passively wait for a perfect role to come up. And I think actively seeking out challenges that need solving, initially thinking about ways that you can make a difference even if you don't have a leadership role. Not thinking about leadership as just someone who's got a title, I think is really important. If you see a gap that needs filling, put yourself forward and speak to the leaders in your school and say, hey, I can see a real opportunity here to show some leadership. I think the most successful leaders understand that waiting isn't a strategy. They take action, they build their own doors and walk through them confidently. And these self-created opportunities often become the most significant stepping stones in your leadership journey. I know quite often when I've seen an opportunity earlier in my career, I've been really willing to put up my hand and say, hey, like even if my principal said, I'm not going to give you a monetary allowance for doing this, or I'm not going to give you any time for doing this, it was a real opportunity for me to show I could manage projects, or I could manage a team or work with a team. And I think that then allowed me to really build my capacity too. Of course, that requires a lot of resilience and a lot of persistence as an emerging leader. And I know I speak to some leaders and they say, you know, every job they've ever applied for, they've gotten. Well, that's certainly not been my experience. And I think being able to be resilient when you get a knockback, but really then allowing you to say, hey, that wasn't the right opportunity for me. And I think that really requires you to overcome some fear and some hesitation, but being willing to take a calculated risk, as I mentioned before, about stepping outside of your comfort zone. And I think that's the place where a lot of growth really happens, is when you find yourself in that sort of pit where you're having to deal with a situation you may never have dealt with before. And I'd also say to emerging leaders that declare your intention. Talk to people about what you really want and why you want it. And that's, again, the notion of your why. Why do you want to be a leader? You know, leadership isn't just about managing systems. It's about inspiring others towards a shared purpose and transforming lives. So, you know, we're in a really privileged position. So sometimes if I ask people about, you know, why they want to be in a leadership position, it might be, well, you know, I feel like it's my turn. You know, that's not really good enough. You really have to, it's a job that requires a lot of dedication. So you have to be willing to put the hard yards in. Look, I think probably now I'm in my 12th year as a principal, and I've certainly spent a lot of time not being comfortable in my own skin, and maybe as a 52-year-old, that's something that comes with age and experience, but, you know, really developing, getting comfortable in your own skin and being vulnerable, being authentic, because to be anything else is exhausting. So if you're trying to be a different kind of leader than the one you naturally are, then and trying to do things you think other people want you to do and in the way they want you to do them, then I don't think you can be successful in that way. I think contemporary leaders know who they are, they know how they lead, and they're at peace with that. And this comes obviously from wisdom gathered along the journey, having high levels of self-awareness, high levels of emotional intelligence, I think is also really important. But I'm also really glad that I've leaned into my authenticity, my vulnerability. I think I'm a reasonably humble person, and also having high levels of equanimity I think is also important, because that's what I get back from my team then. If I'm able to be authentic and vulnerable, that's what I get back from the people that I lead. And I think that's, you know, makes us a better leader. I think also when you're comfortable in your own skin, you stop investing excessive energy into what other people think of you, and instead you focus on doing really meaningful work. If you keep your ego in check, but you know your limitations, you embrace mistakes as learning opportunities, you approach challenges with confidence, then that makes you a better leader. And I'm also the first person, if I get it wrong, I admit it. I apologise. I've stood up in front of my whole staff here at Woodcroft and named when I've got some things wrong, and I think people really appreciate that. And in doing that, it makes others in my school be willing to take risks as well. I love a quote by the author Jim Collins, who wrote the book From Good to Great, and it says, when things are going well, look out the window. When things are not going well, look in the mirror. And I think that's a piece of advice I always remind myself of too. And yeah, just going back to that vulnerability piece, I think that really transforms your relationships with people, and it becomes a really fantastic foundation for leadership that not only empowers yourself but also empowers others. And that's what it's all about too. So I think growing other leaders and showing people how I do the job hopefully can give them some experience of what it means to work with a leader who is authentic, vulnerable, and who also admits when they don't know everything.
Shannon, it's been absolute pleasure hearing your many wise words of wisdom. That vulnerable piece really is resonating with me. Absolute pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Michael.
And for joining us on Voices of Change.
Thank you.